Okay, welcome again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. This is Aparo's Nonprofit Bites and Insights. These are our free webinar series that we have tailored specifically for nonprofits. Today, we are focused on inclusion. So we have Betsy Dorsett with us. She's going to talk us through building a culture of inclusion in care, talking about digital accessibility to organizational change. I'm so excited to have her leading this conversation. Before I turn it over to Betsy, though, a few housekeeping items. This session will be recorded. It will be uploaded to our YouTube channel as well as our website where we house all our webinar recordings. But all of you attending live today will receive a follow-up email from me. It'll include the direct link to the recording, so you don't need to go searching for it, as well as the slide decks and other resources. And in fact, I'm going to drop the link in the chat right now, if I can find it. Here it is. So this box folder has the copy of the slide decks, and what you'll notice is there are two slide decks in there, and one is the text version. So if you have a preference to follow along using that one, feel free to open that up. Betsy, anything else to add around that?
No, and I'll mention that again as we get started too.
Perfect. Great, sounds good. The other thing to note is that you'll notice that the Q&A box and the chat box are available for you to use, so feel free to drop in your questions, comments at any time using whichever format works best for you. For those of you who are new to Aparo, really quickly, we are a nonprofit ourselves. We are based in Charlotte, North Carolina. And what we do is we help other nonprofits with any of their technology needs, challenges, barriers, any questions around technology. We are here to help answer those questions and also help you find those solutions. I won't go through all of our services, but if you are interested in learning more, best way is to go to our website at aparo.org. There is a QR code here to subscribe to our email list as well to stay updated on our programming. I do want to share one program that we have coming up. It's called AI in Action. So this is an in-person event in Charlotte. It's half day long, so 8:30 to 1 p.m. And it's a visioning workshop where you work alongside volunteers to explore how AI can help you and your nonprofit. So this is November 18th. It's also in person in Charlotte. So even if you're outside of Charlotte, but you're willing to drive in for it, you are welcome to sign up. QR code is on the screen, and I will drop the link in the chat in the moment if you prefer. So again, November 18th, we still have just a few slots left. So if you're at all interested, consider signing up for that. Okay. Finally, these are a couple ways to connect with us. If you haven't already, you can subscribe to our email list. If at any time you're interested in our services, you can go to our website, aparo.org/nonprofits, and there's a form there that you can fill out with your request, and someone will get in contact with you as soon as possible. And that's it for me. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and turn it over to Betsy.
Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you all so much for being here, and thanks to Aparo for having me. I want to start by having us all just think about a time when we couldn't get a website to work. Maybe there was a broken link. Maybe there was a confusing form or the form didn't work. Maybe we just couldn't find what we were looking for. And as you're thinking about that experience, I want you to remember how that felt. And we're, a fairly small group. So if you want to just put a word about what that feeling was in the chat, feel free to do that, or just think about it to yourself. what that felt like when you were struggling to do what you needed to do on a website or an app. Yeah, frustrated for sure. Um, it can be really discouraging when something doesn't work the way that we intend or the way that we think it should. It can be frustrating, it can be annoying. For most of us, that's, you know, just something that happens occasionally. But for many disabled people, they face these barriers online every day. The WebAIM Million report, it's a report that looks at the top million websites, and they analyze them for accessibility errors. And they've found recently that 95% of websites tested with automated testing had an average of 51 accessibility errors per page. And that's just through automated testing. You can't actually even find all accessibility errors with automated testing alone. You have to also use manual testing. And so that percentage and those numbers of errors are likely even higher. But today we're going to talk about what it means to remove those barriers from our digital spaces and how building accessibility into our work is actually an act of care and of justice. So my name is Betsy. I live in Asheville, and I'm a communications consultant with about 20 years of experience working with nonprofits. I specialize in helping my clients ensure that their spaces online are accessible. I'm a certified trusted tester, which just means that I've gone through a training and have been certified by the Department of Homeland Security to evaluate if digital content meets federal accessibility standards like Section 508. But this work is a lot more to me than just meeting technical requirements and standards. It's really personal and it's very important to me. I come to it with a grounding in disability justice and from an intersectional framework. So I expect this presentation to take about 40 minutes. We'll have a little bit of time at the end for questions, but feel free to drop those into the chat as we go along. My slides are numbered. There's 25 of them in total. I'm not going to be reading the slides word for word, but I will say everything that's on them. So if it feels better to you to listen and not read, or to read and not listen, that's totally fine. And you also do have the access to a text version of the slides. And so if that feels more supportive, feel free to follow along with that deck on your own. Okay, I'm really excited to talk with you today about digital accessibility, about how it's not just about fixing our websites, but it's about building something bigger. And that's a culture of inclusion and belonging. My guiding belief is one that's championed by disability activists Alice Wong, Mia Mingus, and Sandy Ho, and that is that access is love. And by that, I just mean that digital accessibility is about creating digital spaces where everyone feels welcomed and valued and included. And it's about making sure that everyone can fully participate in the online spaces that we create. Whether that's ensuring that they can navigate those spaces with a keyboard, whether they can access non-text content like images, or just making sure that everyone can understand and fully benefit from your content. Those steps are so important, but those are also a reflection of our values. They're a reflection of how we show up for our communities and how we practice care and inclusion. So it's not only about making our websites better, but it's also about showing that disabled people belong, that their participation matters, and that our organizations are stronger when everyone can be a part of the work. So some of the things we're going to cover today, I'm going to start by talking about some practical steps that you can start taking to make your digital spaces more accessible, focusing on things that content managers and others who may have less coding experience can start doing right away. And then we're going to talk about how those small actions can lead to bigger cultural change within our organizations. And when you registered, you answered a question about where your organization is with accessibility. And I saw that many of you are starting to take small steps. And some of you are actively building accessibility practices. And I hope no matter where you are on this journey that you'll be able to take something away from this webinar. be that the practical steps that you can start today, or some deeper thinking about building a culture of care within your organization. And for those of you who are starting or haven't started yet, I just want to acknowledge that you're here today, and I hope this feels like a step forward for you. I want to take a quick second to talk about the language that I'll be using. You'll hear me say both disabled people and people with disabilities, and that's intentional. So when we use people first language, so saying a person with a disability, that emphasizes that someone is a person first, and their disability is just one part of who they are. When we use identity first language, like saying disabled person, we're recognizing disability as an important and integral part of the person's identity and culture. And it reinforces that disability is not something negative. Different individuals and different communities have different preferences, and both are valid. I tend to alternate unless I know someone's preference, and I encourage you to follow the lead of the individuals and the communities that you work with. I see one quick question. On average, there were 51 errors per page. The other stat was that 95% of the websites tested had accessibility errors. So what is digital accessibility? Basically, it's just making sure that our websites, our emails, our online forms, digital documents, and digital spaces that we create or use, like social media, can be used by everyone, but by disabled people in particular. So this can mean adding alt text to our images, using good color contrast, using clear and meaningful link text, and ensuring that everything can be navigated with just a keyboard. And we'll talk about each of those a little bit more in a bit. But when we center the experiences of disabled people online, we actually end up improving the experience for everyone. So think about someone who's reading your website on a phone outside in bright sunlight, or someone who has a broken arm and can't use a mouse temporarily while it's healing, or an older adult who's experiencing changing vision, or someone who's multitasking and needs information quickly and clearly. Accessibility best practices help people in all those situations. Because while digital accessibility centers the access needs of disabled people, everyone has access needs. And creating accessible digital spaces makes those spaces stronger, more usable, and more welcoming for everyone. So you may be aware that digital accessibility is a legal requirement. In the US, courts have held that the Americans with Disability Act and Sections 504 and 508 of the Rehabilitation Act require digital content to be accessible to disabled people. So that includes websites, documents, videos, and anything else delivered digitally. We're also seeing more state-level laws requiring digital accessibility. Colorado recently passed a law that requires state agencies and public entities to meet accessibility standards. And California and New York have similar requirements. Globally, the European Accessibility Act went into effect this year, and that expanded digital accessibility requirements across EU member states. And what this shift shows is that accessibility is increasingly recognized worldwide as essential for equity and participation. And while it is a legal obligation, as I said previously, it's also a reflection of our values. So we can go a step further because accessibility is also part of a larger movement for justice. The disability justice framework was created by disabled Black, Indigenous, and other racialized activists, including activist Patty Byrne and the group Sins Invalid. And it pushes beyond compliance and inclusion efforts that often center only white, cisgender, or physically disabled people. And it reminds us that access is collective, not just individual, and it's not just about legal standards. It's about power, interdependence, and accountability to community. The bottom line here is that the legal requirements are the floor, not the ceiling. We absolutely need them, but disability justice recognizes that access is a human right. It asks us to consider who gets centered in our design choices, who's being left out, And how do systems, digital or otherwise, reinforce ableism, racism, and other forms of exclusion? So here are the 6 tips that we're going to talk about first. And as we go through these, I want to keep in that disability justice framework in mind, remembering that these are grounded in people's experiences online. So we're going to talk about captions, transcripts, and audio descriptions. So making sure that our multimedia content has multiple ways for people to access that information. We're going to talk about alternative text or alt text. Those are descriptions that are added to images for screen readers. We're going to talk about using a clear and logical heading structure. We're going to talk about color contrast and using color thoughtfully. And we're going to talk about link text, making sure that our links and buttons explain clearly what they do or where they go. And then we're going to talk about keyboard navigation. So making sure that people can move through our websites without a mouse or a trackpad. We're going to go through each one. We're going to talk about how to test to see if there's a barrier and some quick fixes that you can start making right away. But as we do this, I just want to keep in mind that digital accessibility isn't about perfection. It's about progress. And every small improvement that we make makes a difference and moves us forward. So let's start with multimedia content. When we talk about providing alternative formats for multimedia, I mean a few key things. So you want to provide transcripts for audio content so that if someone can't hear or process audio easily, they could still access that information in text format. You want to include captions for videos. So you want those captions to be synced to the sound and they should be accurate. You can use some platforms like YouTube to auto-generate those captions. But if you do that, it's important to edit and make sure that they are accurate. Auto-generated captions often have a lot of errors and they can be confusing. And then you can provide audio descriptions in videos for important visual information. So if there's something critical that's happening visually, but it's not explained in the spoken dialogue, people who are blind or have low vision aren't going to understand what's going on. So not every video is necessarily going to need an audio description, but for instance, if you have a video that shows a graph or it shows important on-screen instructions without saying them out loud, those are things that you would want to have an audio description of. And these things certainly benefit people with disabilities, but they also help out people who are watching our content or listening to our content in noisy environments, people who are learning in a second language, and people who might be multitasking. And I think oftentimes when we think about captions and transcripts and editing and writing captions and transcripts, we think of how time consuming that can be. And the same is true, I hear this also about alt text. It just adds extra time to the work that we're doing. But I hope with our grounding in disability justice, we can shift our thinking a little bit to understanding that people don't have access to that content without taking these steps, and start to see our multimedia content and our images as unfinished until we have accurate captions and transcripts. So let's talk about that alt text. Alt text is basically just a description of an image that people who can't see will hear from a screen reader. So it's added to the code, it's not on the page, and screen readers read aloud that description. Some browsers also display that alt text when an image doesn't load. So for instance, if someone has a slow internet connection, that alt text might display on their browser. And so it also makes it important for anyone who's impacted by the digital divide, right? So that's a lot of people, often folks living in rural areas. Most content management systems like WordPress, Squarespace, or Wix, they'll give you a field for alt text when you upload your image. And it's important that you complete that field thoughtfully and not leave it blank or just repeat the file name or use something sort of obscure. So instead, you want to focus on the meaning and the context of the image in your alt text. You don't need to include every detail. If there's text on the graphic, you should include that text in your alt text. It's best practice if you can to avoid posting images of text. A text on an image can't be translated with translation tools. And if people are zooming in to make the text larger, that text isn't responsive, right? So it can become pixelated and hard to read when it's enlarged. But if you can't avoid it and you do have that text on a graphic, just put that text in your alt text as well. You can use proper names. You want to use all appropriate punctuation that signals to the screen reader to pause if there's a comma or a period. And so you want to be sure you have the punctuation in your alt text just as if it were on the screen. If you have a chart or a graph, you can summarize the key findings in your alt text. And then you can also, certainly if it's a complicated graph, you can include text on the screen on the page that has a fuller description of that graph. You don't need to start your alt text by saying image of or picture of. You can just start describing the image because a screen reader will already identify the content as an image. So it's just redundant if you include that. The bottom line is that good alt text ensures that key information is available to everyone, no matter how they're accessing your content. Okay, our next step is about using a clear and logical heading structure. So if you go to a website or a web page, you probably notice that there are often visually distinct headers, and that helps sighted users to understand the page structure, how content is related, and it allows us to skim quickly to sections that we're most interested in. Screen readers and other assistive technology also rely on headings to convey that information and usability to disabled users. And I'm talking about here programmatic heading levels. So if you've ever seen in your website's content management system or in Word or Google, you can identify a heading as an H1, an H2, an H3, and so on. And those are the programmatic heading levels that we're talking about here. And they just ensure that folks using a screen reader or assistive technology can navigate the page efficiently and make sense of the content. The basic idea is that every page should have one H1, that's the main title of your page, and then you'll have H2s for the main sections of content. And then you'll have H3s for subsections of those main sections, and so on. So you can think of it as an outline of your content. You want to avoid skipping levels. So you don't want to jump from an H2 to an H6 because maybe you like the default styling of that H6 more. You can always manually change the styling of a heading level. So you want to keep it in that logical, structured order. And that helps screen readers, users understand how the sections are related or connected, and it lets them jump directly to the section that they need. And it just makes your content more accessible and more usable, and it's easier to maintain over time. So now we're going to talk about color and using color intentionally, and how that can help ensure your content is easy to read. So when we talk about color contrast, we're really just talking about making sure that our text or our foreground stands out clearly from the background. There are online contrast checkers that you can use. You can put the colors that you're using in the foreground and the background, and they will tell you if they meet accessibility standards. And I've included a link to WebAIM's free contrast checker in the handouts. But the basic idea you probably get just from this slide is that you want dark text and a light background or light text and a dark background. And this helps everyone, right? It certainly helps people with low vision, but remember that person who's standing outside using their phone and there's a glare from the sun. This last point is about avoiding using color alone to convey meaning. So if you're indicating something important by color alone, people who can't perceive color will be left out and they won't get that message. So for example, if you have a form field that's missing required information, you don't want to just highlight that in red. You also want to include a text message this field is required, please complete this field, something like that. On charts and graphs, you don't want to rely just on color to differentiate between different data points. You want to use labels, patterns, or symbols in combination with color so that it's more easily understood. So this thoughtful use of color is going to make your digital spaces easier to use for more people, and it'll strengthen your communications overall. In the next slide, I'm just going to show you what can happen when we do use color alone to convey that meaning. So this is how we often see charts. This is a pie chart, and each slice of the pie, as you can see, is a different color. And then there's this legend at the bottom that explains what each of those colors mean. However, 1 in 12 men and 1 in 200 women are colorblind. So that's millions of people who might struggle to read this chart in this way that it's presented. So this is how that same chart might look to someone who sees color in shades of gray. And it's pretty impossible to tell which slice matches which label. And this is that same chart as it might look to someone with red-green color blindness. There's some variation, but it's not enough to make this chart easily understandable. So what do we do? One solution would be just to label each slice directly. And by adding the text inside the chart, we can make sure everyone can tell exactly what the slice represents, no matter how they see color. This is a pretty small change, but it makes a big difference. And it supports better understanding for everyone. So our next tip is about link text. Link text is crucial for accessibility and just for general usability of your site. But links and buttons should clearly describe where they go or what they do. So the next time you open a page on your website, try scanning just the links. So just look for perhaps the blue underlined text or just the text that's in a button. And without the context of the surrounding words, does it make sense? Does just that underlined text make sense? Is it self-explanatory where the links go or what actions will happen if you click them? It's really common to see links with generic text like click here or read more. But when you're using a screen reader, in the same way that we can quickly scan usually and see where a link is that we're looking for, a screen reader can skip through links. It can also pull up a list of just the links on a page, and that helps the user to jump to exactly what they're looking for. So if every link just says click here, that person is only going to hear click here, click here, click here, click here, and it's not going to be clear what any of those links do or where they go. So a good fix is just to use descriptive link text, like instead of saying click here, read more, say download our annual report. Another thing this helps with, it actually makes that target area, the area where you want to click or tap, a little bit bigger. So someone doesn't have to be so precise. There's room for error where they're clicking or tapping. And we want to use unique link text for different destinations. And this just improves navigation for everyone, and it respects all users' needs. So people with disabilities have a lot of tools and a lot of adaptive strategies that they use to move through digital spaces. And not everyone uses a mouse or a trackpad. Some people, perhaps because they have mobility disabilities, they may have a repetitive strain injury, they may have a temporary injury like that broken arm, or just because they prefer it, will rely on a keyboard to navigate websites. Keyboard functionality is also critical for assistive technology like screen readers and other input devices like switch devices. So when you're on your website the next time, open a page, and instead of using your mouse or your trackpad on your laptop to move through the page, press Tab on your keyboard, and that will move you through all the interactive elements on the page. So you should move through links, through menu items, through buttons, through form fields. If you press Shift and hold down Tab, you can move backwards through those same elements. And when you press Space or Enter or Return, you can activate links and buttons. So as you're doing this, some things you want to look out for are, can you reach and interact with all the elements like links, menus, forms, and buttons? Do you get stuck anywhere? Is there a menu or a pop-up that you can tab into but can't get out of? That's what we call a keyboard trap. Is there a visible focus indicator? So is there a clear outline or highlight that shows where you are as you're moving through the page, or are you getting lost? Because if people can't navigate your site with a keyboard, they're going to be completely prevented from using it. So if you're finding that you can't reach important links, if you're getting stuck somewhere, or there's no visible focus, these are important accessibility roadblocks to be aware of. But this is the one thing that we're going to talk about today that you can't fix by editing your site content or a simple input in your content management system. This often requires changes or additions to code or to your templates, and often you have to bring in a developer or someone who's familiar with how to make those changes. So if you do have a web developer or vendor that you're working with, you want to document the issue that you're finding and share it with them. So for example, you could say, I can't tab into the main menu, or I lose keyboard focus in our events calendar, and let them troubleshoot and try and fix whatever's happening there. If you don't have someone who can do that work for you, don't panic. Knowing there's a barrier is really valuable information. And remember, this is about progress, not perfection. So it just means that you can start brainstorming ways to get external help, apply for grants, or build this into your budget when you plan your next website improvement. The point here is that spotting the problem matters. Even if you can't fix everything today, you're building awareness and you're naming those accessibility barriers, and that's how change can really start. And as we're going to discuss in just a minute, it's also where your organization's leadership can play a big role in helping set those accessibility priorities and supporting and budgeting for future improvements. Because digital accessibility is incredibly important, it strengthens your communications, your events, your community reach, but it does something even bigger. So when we're practicing digital accessibility thoughtfully and we're centering the needs of disabled people, we're showing our teams what inclusion looks like in action. If we begin nurturing the mindset that adding alt text to an image or ensuring that a registration form is accessible, you begin to build a habit of inclusion. And once that mindset and those habits start in digital spaces, they can naturally grow outward into how we think about hiring, how we plan events, how we support our teams, and how we build our organizational culture. So I see digital accessibility as a doorway, not the destination. It can be a first step toward a deeper, more lasting culture of care, equity, and belonging. So let's talk about some of the things that we can keep in mind along that part of our journey. One thing that we can do, in addition to removing those barriers in digital spaces, is to start thinking about how we're inviting people into the spaces, both online and in person, that we build. And a powerful and often overlooked way to support accessibility is by asking people about their access needs, by sharing ours and normalizing those conversations along with caring and collaborative supports. So make it a habit to include a question in your event registration forms or RSVPs or in your meeting invites, like, let us know if you have any access needs we can support. And then when someone does share an access need, treat it with care and follow up thoughtfully and do your best to meet that need or have a conversation about what is possible. There are some access needs that you can begin to meet without being asked, and that doesn't put the burden on people with disabilities to name their access needs because you're already anticipating them. So some of the things you might consider is providing captioning for virtual events, offering accessible or reserved seating, hiring an ASL interpreter, making your materials available in large print and in Braille, and being mindful of dietary needs or allergies. And then once you build those into your events, be transparent about what you're able to offer so that folks can feel they're included. Because this simple practice doesn't just support people's ability to fully show up and participate, it also sends a message that you're working to build accessibility and inclusion into your organization's DNA, not as an afterthought. We can also start bringing accessibility into team meetings, project planning, and decision-making conversations. And doing that can help shift accessibility from an occasional add-on to being a part of how our organizations operate. So we can start asking, how are we making sure this is accessible to everyone? Or who might we be leaving out? When we ask this in meetings about a new web page, a new social media campaign, event planning, or hiring process, we start to normalize the expectation that accessibility is a critical part of doing good work. But to be successful, digital accessibility and accessibility can't just be a technical or one-time project. It has to be a leadership priority. Because when it's optional, when it's seen as something that's nice to have, or it's treated as one person or one team's responsibility, it often gets postponed, it gets forgotten, or it gets de-emphasized when things get really busy. But when leadership builds it into project plans, into our budgets, and into conversations across the organization, it becomes more sustainable and more successful. Leadership also models the understanding and the mindset that accessibility isn't something you fix once and forget about. It's an ongoing commitment and practice. Because our organizations evolve, our technology changes, new community needs emerge, and accessibility is a practice that can grow and change alongside all of those things. And by making it a part of our culture, it means it's continuously nurtured, just like our mission, our values, and our community relationships. Because accessibility isn't just about our website. It touches every part of how we connect with and serve our communities. For communications, it might look like making sure our websites and emails and social media are usable, effective, impactful, and reach as many people as possible. For events and programs, it might look like ensuring our registration asks about access needs, the venues that we choose are physically accessible, that we're creating spaces that are welcoming and supportive for people who are neurodivergent or those with cognitive disabilities. And in hiring an HR, it's about creating an application process that works for disabled candidates, ensuring our interviews are accessible, and onboarding and supporting employees in ways that meet their access needs. And for leadership and strategy, it's again about budgeting for accessibility, setting concrete goals for inclusion, and treating accessibility as a non-negotiable part of our values and planning. And these are just examples that scratch the surface, but I hope they show how once we adopt an accessibility mindset, we can begin to weave accessibility into every part of our work. Because when we practice accessibility in digital spaces with care, we plant the seed for a culture of inclusion. Every time we think about alt text or color contrast, we're reinforcing the idea that access matters and that disabled people matter. And when leadership supports those practices and when teams build accessibility into everyday conversations and projects, real culture change can happen. So accessibility can start on your website, but it deepens through our leadership choices, through our everyday habits, and the way we show care for our communities and for our colleagues. There's not one single thing that will do it by itself. It's the small, consistent, visible actions that shape a culture where everyone belongs. Okay, we've talked about a lot today. We went over 6 steps that you can start to think about and start to take action on right away, right? So making sure our multimedia has captions, transcripts, or audio descriptions, making sure that we're writing good alt text for our images, making sure our pages are structured with headings that are logical, using color thoughtfully, using link text that's descriptive, and then how to test for if our site is navigable with a keyboard. And we also talked about how we can start to think about access and inclusion more broadly across our organizations. But I want to circle back to the idea of progress over perfection, because accessibility isn't something we can ever fully check off a list. I think there's sometimes a misunderstanding that we can add one line of code or an overlay and completely fix all of the barriers on our site. And it's just not true. Even if you brought someone like me in and I did a full website accessibility audit and I remediated every issue that I found, that would be amazing, and a major step forward, but you still wouldn't be finished with accessibility. Because accessibility and building access is a practice, and it's something that we nurture over time. It's not something that we can ever finish. The small, steady actions that we commit to today can, over time, create real, lasting culture change while also making our digital spaces more welcoming, more caring, and more equitable. So I just want you to start wherever you are, keep moving forward, and celebrate your progress as you improve your digital spaces. And that's what I have today. Thank you all so much for being part of this conversation. Um, I also, if you're in Asheville or West North Carolina, I host a digital accessibility and inclusive design meetup, and you can learn more at that QR code or send me an email. The next one is on Tuesday, October 14th. And I'd love to hear any thoughts or questions or reflections that folks have. I can share my contact info in the chat. I will do that.
And while you're doing that, I'll share my reflection. I have made it on my to-do list that I will add to our webinar registration. Please let us know if you have any access needs we can support. So thank you for that tip. I will definitely get on that.
That's great. I'm just scrolling back up. Oh, it looks like people were able to access the slides. That's great. So,
Um,
making content available in multiple language. So there's a question here about that. That's a really good and important question. And I have done a lot of work around that and around language justice. If you're one thing I will say, I would need to know more specifically like how you mean, but if we're talking about web pages, so having one web page in English and one web page in another language, one thing that you want to be sure is that that page that's not in the main page, the main language of your website. So let's say your website is in English, there's a tag at the top of every page that identifies that for screen readers. It says what language the page is in. For the page that's not in that language, that's in a different language, or if there's content on a page that is in a different language than the rest of the page, you want to be sure that that's in the code, right? So you want to change the language of that page or of that content. And if you send me an email, if that's not clear, because it's much easier to show you, but I can send you more information. When we do that, screen readers, if someone's using a screen reader and they have the language downloaded, it will switch between language pretty seamlessly. Um, if a page is marked as English, but it's in Spanish, for instance, that screen reader will read that Spanish as if it's English. So it will use all the grammar and language rules of English for Spanish, and it makes it really hard to understand. Okay, so you're working with a client who has a large group of people who speak Spanish, and none of their content is in Spanish. Um, yeah, they should translate it. Yeah, right. So you recommended writing some blogs in Spanish to test. There certainly are. They're in New York. There certainly are um, folks that you can work with that are language justice oriented, that can help with that, right? Because you can translate a page into Spanish but if it doesn't make sense culturally, that content isn't gonna
Mhm.
hit right, right? So it's a little more than just translating, although that's a great first step. Um, you also want to be sure that it's culturally sound as well. And there's certainly folks that specialize in that. And I do have one organization that I can recommend to you if you want to email me. Yeah, send me an email. I'm happy to share contact with you.
We had a couple questions come through the Q&A, Betsy. So the first one is, any recommendations for platforms or software that help with access inclusivity?
It would depend like what you're talking about specifically. So are you talking about for a website, like is it a WordPress website? Is it a Squarespace website? There are a lot of like add-ons for WordPress websites in particular. That's what I specialize in, that do help with accessibility. I guess one thing that I don't want to advise you against. You can make your own choices, but I will say that there are a lot of companies out there that will offer an overlay or one line of code. You add it to your website and you get that little bar on the side of your screen that has all these, accessibility features. What researchers have found that is that those don't work for disabled people. So a lot of people with disabilities, they set their computers up with all the settings that work for them, um, and then when they navigate to a website that uses one of those overlays, it messes with their settings. So it actually makes it a little harder in some cases, to use those sites. And also just imagine if you're moving through a website and at every website that you go to has a different overlay and you're constantly having to set it up for every site that you go to, for your specific access needs. Whereas if we build accessibility into like our everyday practices, um, it can be a lot more seamless across all websites, as we're navigating around the internet, in the way it's intended. Um, but first, what do you use for websites? Um, what I'm gonna need a little more information. What do I use specifically for what's your goal here, I guess is my question, instead of an overlay. So I do a lot of the things that I have mentioned here. Um, I do those, right? You can also go in and change the code of your website, right? So you would need to work with someone who is a developer who understands accessibility, to make sure that you're not building in barriers into the code. This is a process you can certainly go in and remediate, but it's certainly a process that as you're making website improvements or website changes, it's easier to start and build accessibility in from the beginning. So there's not like necessarily a tool that I'm using that fixes every barrier on a website. It's about finding those barriers, it's about designing with intention, and building that in through the whole process of building a website or fixing a website.
There's a question around alt text. Is that preferred over including captions that say image description? Another question is to request confirmation that hashtags need to be capitalized for readers. They recently attended a training last year that instructed this, but wanted to verify your experience. So, for example, instead of typing hashtag friends, typing hashtag friends with a capital first letter.
Gotcha. Yeah. So it is true. You could do, if it's one word, you can do hashtag with a lowercase f for friends. If it's multiple words, in the same way that I think I mentioned for alt text, you want to use punctuation. Um, Screen readers also see those capital letters that it marks the beginning of a new word. So even in a hashtag, if it's a compound hashtag, you want to use camel case or title case, right? So that each new word in that compound hashtag has a capital letter.
And that just allows it to be read out loud, in a way that's comprehensible with screen readers. Oh, thank you for including my LinkedIn there. What was the first question? It was about alt text.
Oh, yes. Is that preferred over including captions that say image description?
Um, I often use both, to be honest. If we're talking about social media, I will always include alt text, and then I'll include an image description in the caption right underneath it. Um, because not everyone who has low vision or who has trouble processing images uses a screen reader, right? So if you have an image description included on the page with an image, that's a really good practice for including folks like that.
Great questions.
Yeah, these are really good questions. And if anyone, I know sometimes I like leave a webinar and then I think of 5 questions. Feel free to email me. Reach out anytime if that's your experience as well.
I will be sending a follow-up email. It'll include the recording, the deck, as well as Betsy's contact information. So I'll be sure that to add that in. I did include a webinar survey. So before you leave, please click on that. I'm going to drop it again so that you have it up. And please complete that. Any recommendations for future webinar topics, please drop that in the survey as well. We do go through that. And I am building out our 2026 topics, so now is a good time to drop in those recommendations or suggestions. I don't see any more questions coming through, so thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Betsy, for this amazing presentation. Again, I think we all really love the perspective that you brought on this topic, so thank you for that. Any final words, Betsy?
No, just so much appreciation for everyone being here and for the work that I know you're already doing and will continue to do. Just a lot of appreciation. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Aparo, for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, that's it for today. Thank you, everyone, and hope you have a great rest of your week. Take care.